What's going on, everybody? Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports here, and today I'm going to be doing a review on this Bilstein 5100 system for the Toyota Tacoma. So first things first, to lay down kind of a baseline for what this kit is, what the settings are, and what the stance is on our vehicle. This is Bilstein's 5100 leveling kit, and I'm going to be talking about it in terms of both the fronts and the rears together as a whole system. You can buy fronts and rears separate, but we have it as a kit, and that's what most people tend to lean towards when they're looking at upgrading their truck. So up front, Bilstein gives you a leveling strut that is adjustable for height, but it's worth clarifying that this isn't a coilover. It doesn't include a new spring. It's not a complete unit. It's going to use your factory spring, but what it's designed to do is essentially there's a couple different cuts into it with a C-clip, and as you adjust that C-clip up to these different channels, it will adjust the ride height. So when you're putting it together, that's when you decide what height you want. And then after you have it set, it's going to set the spring perch, and then that's when you pile everything else on to complete the strut assembly. The rear, on the other hand, does not provide any lift, and that's the case with pretty much all rear shocks. There's no spring or anything there, and this kit doesn't include a block or anything like that. So our truck is factory ride height in the rear. Now, for that front suspension, I do want to note that we have it lifted, but the numbers that Bilstein provides are generally estimates, and a lot of times you'll see different numbers in different Bilstein kits depending on the generation of truck you have or the model. So the settings on this specific setup for like a 2018 Tacoma up to 2020 or 2021 might look a little different from an older Tacoma settings or like a 4Runner. What we have set on the front of ours is the number 4 clip, which in this case provides about 1.5 inches of lift. Bilstein rates it as 1.55 inches, and it seems like from our measurements that's pretty close to accurate. I think we're maybe just slightly under that, or right at 1.5 inches. With these lift settings on this truck, I feel like the stance is pretty much perfect. It sits dead level. It looks really, really nice, brings that nose up in the air, and it does give you the ability to run a slightly larger tire. Now, what we have here for wheels and tires is a set of 17 by 9-inch black Rhino Prim wheels. They're the fake bead lock, not the true bead lock, and these are a 0mm offset. Then we have those wrapped in 285/70/17 Toyo Open Country RTs. Overall, really, really nice setup. These fit pretty much perfectly with the way we have the truck lined up. And I do want to note that there is a little bit of trimming we did inside of the fenders, just kind of cutting a little bit of the inner fender plastic and a touch off the bumper corners there to accommodate it, so when it's turning it doesn't rub. With these little modifications to the inner fender and everything, I think the overall look is perfect. The tires fill out the wheel wells nicely. It's a good size for these Toyotas. It runs about a 32.7 if you do the math, which is real solid. You get all the capability you need without it being too big to where you get constant rubbing or you're starting to really, really sacrifice fuel economy and performance, especially because these trucks don't have a ton of power on tap to begin with. This does allow us to run daily driving on the street, no rub whatsoever. It's very accommodating for you guys who are gonna put this kit on a vehicle that you drive all the time and take back and forth to work. Now, in terms of off-road, it tends to pretty much not rub at all unless you get it pinned into a situation where you're articulating, that tire's coming up and you're turning. Then it'll catch a little bit, usually right at the back of the fender, and it's nothing super aggressive, but it's worth noting. So if you're trying to avoid all rub whatsoever, then this may not be the exact setup you want. You might want to go slightly higher in terms of lift, or you might possibly want to size down your tire a little bit, but generally I find it to be so rare and so minor that the rub we do get is not an issue. So now, finally talking in terms of off-road performance. This is a kit that I feel punches above its weight. It's definitely a budget, more entry-level system. These leveling struts are not a complete coilover, and they're not going to compete with something like a Fox 2.5 external resi coilover or an Icon kit or Kings. They're just not built to that level, but they're also not at that price range. So depending on the driving you do, this may or may not be a good system for you. Now, to elaborate on that, I think this kit does really, really well in off-road scenarios where you're running some forest roads like I'm doing right now, maybe getting back to your favorite camping spot or your favorite fishing spot. You're gonna be hitting some washboards or cattle guards, you know, maybe some rocky or rougher terrain or the water's eating it up a bit. Just stuff where it's not necessarily four-wheel drive, but you want that clearance or you want a little bit more comfort in your ride. It does excellent in that regard, and it seems to handle pretty well even with a little additional weight in the vehicle. So if you have your family loaded up, you've got some camping gear in here, and you're worried about these shocks fading over time, I find that they do resist fade pretty nicely. Now, as with anything, that it can hit a limit. So if you're running for many, many hours just bouncing over washboards or hitting whoops, they are eventually going to suffer a bit in ride quality. Those shocks will heat up, and there's only so much they can do with the amount of fluid they have. But the benefit here is that with the way Bilstein has these designed, they are a larger reservoir than what you get from factory on the Tacoma, especially in the more base model trucks. Obviously, TRD Pro is kind of an exception for any of this, but in the more standardized trucks like what we have here, you're going to get a better performing shock that still has valving designed for it, and it's going to hold up a lot better on those long road trips or big kind of off-road excursions. The other area this kit does really well is in some of the more technical rocky terrain where you're navigating trails with a bit of skill. So if you're going up to Sedona and you're hitting Soldier's Pass or Broken Arrow, or you want to take this to Colorado and run Imogene or something like that, this kit will get that done. And it's actually pretty impressive that it can handle terrain like that, but because you can accommodate a larger tire, it really makes the difference, and these systems handle well in that sort of terrain. The interesting thing about suspensions in terms of rocky trails like that is oftentimes it's not necessarily the best test of what the actual shock's capability is, because you're just kind of slowly bumbling over obstacles, and really all it has to do is manage the vehicle's weight for a certain amount of time. So that's not necessarily the most rigorous terrain for any suspension, but the Bilsteins do handle it well. Where I feel like these 5100s really start to suffer in terms of off-road performance is when you're pushing them at higher speeds or trying to kind of bomb through the desert and hit whoops with them. They definitely manage it well, and you'll see a lot of footage in here of us pounding this Tacoma over whoops out in the cinders and really kind of rocking this thing and trying to get it to hit the bump stops. And it does do well, but it's only going to do well for so long. And bouncing off the bump stops is never a good solution for that kind of driving, and it's not a good way to maintain control. So once you start to push past 20 miles an hour in that kind of terrain, it gets a little bit rowdy. You start bucking around, losing a bit of the control that you had, and it makes it a little unsafe. So definitely not the kit you want to consider if you're the type of person who's trying to build more of a desert pre-runner style vehicle. This just isn't going to accommodate that kind of driving, and you're going to feel that really quickly when you get it up into higher speed situations. Overall though, I feel like the market for this kit probably is not people doing those kinds of builds, and if you're the type of person that is looking for a system that's going to be better than a leveling spacer, but not quite as intense as a full coilover kit, this really is that happy medium. The other question I see a lot is, with this kit, the other big competitor is going to be the Eibach Pro Truck kits. And comparatively, I'd say they're pretty similar. I've spent some time in the Eibach as well, and I do like that system. It operates in a lot of the same ways that the Bilstein does, and I think has a lot of the same pros and cons. The only thing I would say is that I find the Bilstein ride to be just a little bit more comfortable. It's just that slight bit more supple, and I'm more familiar with Bilsteins and how they perform off-road to where it's more comfortable to me personally. So if I were to choose, I would probably lean this direction over the Eibach. There is one area though where the Eibach really do tend to beat out the Bilstein system, and that's in the fact that they provide a coil spring upgrade. So if you're somebody who's going to be adding a lot of weight to the front of the vehicle, big heavy steel bumper, aftermarket winch, some lights and things on there, you're probably going to want to consider a new spring that has a rate that's adjusted and set up to handle more weight. Because even if you adjust ride height, that doesn't necessarily mean that that spring's going to be ready to accommodate that kind of weight, and Toyota doesn't factor that in when they make the factory springs. So Eibach having that as an upgrade for their kit definitely is a plus, and I know a lot of guys that do like that if their builds are a little bit more fleshed out. They're doing something that's an overland build that's got a lot of equipment, that's just a little bit more accommodating. So when you're looking between these two kits, definitely keep that in mind. Lastly, I want to talk real quick about on-road performance. I think for the most part, people are mainly concerned with the off-road performance and how much of a tire increase they can get on a vehicle like this. But if this is your daily driver and you're commuting back and forth to work, then the way it rides on the street is going to be important to you. And it's probably going to matter to your family as well if they're riding or driving this vehicle too. So with the Bilsteins at this 1.5 inch setting, and with the way we have everything laid out, I find them to be really comfortable on the road. It handles really nicely. I don't think it fatigues at all on the driver. You're not going to hurt your spine or feel like it's a back breaker going over speed bumps and things. As you can imagine, if this kit is going to ride nice like it does on a rough dirt road, it's probably going to be nice on a smooth paved road. And I don't think you'd have to worry in this scenario of having a truck that is going to be uncomfortable or unpleasant for your significant other or for your family to ride in. This is still a very road trippable vehicle, and doing miles on the highway, whether it be going up north or traveling to family or going back and forth between work and home, are all going to be just fine. So overall, just kind of wrapping up everything I've talked about in this review, the Bilstein kit is an excellent option. Obviously, I personally like it a whole lot. And I think if you're a novice getting into off-roading or somebody that's just looking to lightly modify their truck, get a little more off-road capability and a bigger tire on here, this should be one of the first kits you consider. And it's certainly going to be miles ahead of a leveling spacer. You're just going to get a safer, better performing ride. And if you're somebody who is a bit more advanced and you run trails more frequently and do a lot of off-road driving, but you want a simple, affordable setup for your truck, I think Bilstein's got you covered there too. Like I said, this kit tends to punch above its weight, and in my experience, there's still a lot of aggressive trails out there that you can hit on a suspension like this. Now, like I mentioned before, all that comes with the idea of how you use your truck and how you drive. So if you're the type of person who's looking for the best, highest quality suspension that's just not gonna fade, it's gonna take those heavy hits, you're gonna be able to bomb over whoops, this isn't something you're going to want to consider. I think that this will be a big disappointment for you, and it's not going to be able to push at those high speed runs like you want it to. So take all that as you will, and like I said, decide what's going to work best for your application, the way you have your truck built. Now, for those of you who are watching this review and you're very numbers oriented and detail oriented, and you want all the specs for the materials that Bilstein uses and every single number related to compression and valving on these kits, I'm not going to lay that all out here, but we do have some of that information available on our website, and of course Bilstein has some of that information available as well. So we'll have links down in the description below where you can click through and check that out. So as always, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you found this review helpful, and I will see you guys next time.